Welcome back, and thank you very much to all my subscribers and to those who have watched my videos so far. Today I will be talking about postcolonial theory and its relationship or its relation to Macbeth. Now, I originally thought I was going to talk about Hamlet. However, I will eventually get to postcolonial theory and Hamlet, specifically in dealing with Fortinbras and his relationship with the young Hamlet. But I read one of my last papers, short papers from grad school, and it was a on-the-fly paper. It was a timed essay, and I really enjoyed rereading it after a few years. It's been a few years since I wrote it. So I'm going to kind of just go right into postcolonial theory. I'm going to really explain almost every single little detail with the theory, so stay with me. So here we go. So postcolonial theory, for the most part, delves into the responses from oppressed peoples towards their oppressors. However, it does go much deeper than that, or it can at least, or at the very least, broaden much more than that. So fundamentally, it deals with exile, oppression, alienation, and loss of innocence. These can come across in literature in a myriad of ways, and therefore postcolonialist theory has a very broad base. And it's probably why it's one of my favorite theories to utilize when I'm reading something. And you'll see why in a second, or in a few seconds. So also, it delves into many of the other modernist and postmodernist theories too, such as Marxism, which approaches class theory and its effects on character in literature, as well on its effects on the plot. So that's Marxism, right? Structuralism and poststructuralism, which are much cooler than they sound, which approach language as something divorced from the overt themes of a given piece, therefore making language the main component of what you're analyzing, and how language is used to alienate and to oppress. Then we have queer theory, which encompasses gay, lesbian, bisexual, transvestitism, etc., 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 all the stuff that kind of, LGBTQ, all that stuff all together. It deals with the roles that we feel we are forced to play in society, or are pressed to play in society, or in just the way it works in a given work of literature, or a play, or a piece of artwork, music, etc., etc., and how all that deals with marginalization. Now, throughout the ages too, so it's not just for now. You can apply all this stuff going back to the very beginning of recorded time, and that's the beautiful part about postcolonialism, even though I will discuss the hypocrisy of postcolonialism at the end of the video, or this video. And then finally we have gender theory, or the roles that women and men have to play in society, or are supposed to play, or even expected to play. And all this opens up various avenues to explore and to analyze. So, a story has to essentially have a conflict of sorts, correct? Otherwise, why are we even tuning in? And this is my cross-reference, or my reference to New Criticism, which you can watch the video on Hamlet that I made about New Critical Theory. So, this conflict of sorts, whether or not it's internal or external, it need not matter. So therefore, postcolonialist theory can be applied rather easily. If the character is being oppressed, find the oppressor, and then analyze the forced marginalization from both angles, and a simple essay can be derived. However, logically, taking this to a further level will undoubtedly produce other scenarios. And that's the beautiful part of postcolonialist theory. That is the part that entices me, personally, and also entices many other people to use this theory. It just works on so many different levels, and it webs out. So the first thing I studied Shakespeare quite a lot in grad school. Macbeth, Hamlet were the two big ones. I also did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, which is Tom Stoppard, and I taught Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. However, I did not teach Macbeth. That was someone else who taught that. I taught King Lear and The Dresser in the spring, and in the fall it was Hamlet and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. I love Shakespeare, and I know it's something that some people say, well, everybody loves Shakespeare if you really think about it. Like we've all been through this. Everyone has to read this. But I'm going to give you a really, really good example of how awesome Shakespeare is. So the other day I'm at work, and I realized that one of the bartenders that I work with looks a lot like Kenneth Branagh from Othello, from the movie Othello. So I show him the photo of it, and what he does, the first thing he actually says, he doesn't comment on my comment. He says, you know what? That is probably one of my favorite movies. And I said, Othello? Really? You like Othello? I didn't know you like Shakespeare. He's like, no, Hamlet. I remember watching that very long film in high school, and it moved me. And there you have it. Because ultimately what it comes down to is that Shakespeare plays at the root, or he plays to the root of who we are. And that's what postcolonialism does. The theory is not like the actual oppression, because that would be really sadistic. So let's kind of get back to this, because that was a very huge digression. On a Marxist level, going back to Marxism that I mentioned earlier, the character of Macbeth feels that he's marginalized by the king, and after some vague portents and a somewhat overbearing wife, depending upon how you want to look into that, who I will mention later, the king is assassinated, and Macbeth is the new king. So, the status quo is overthrown. That is Marxism. Now, you might say, well, no, that's wrong, J.M. Norman. That is not Marxism. Marxism has to do with the lower classes rising up to take over the upper class. And that's not what Marx intended at all. That's not even what he talked about. He just talked about the class struggle, that there would always be a class struggle. And not to do much of a digression right now, what you're seeing right now in politics, this whole Trump thing and the Sanders thing, the Clinton thing, and like the people in the establishment, the people outside the establishment, the people say they're in the establishment, but they're really outside, and the people lying, all that stuff, that's Marxism. Okay, so, food for thought, etc., etc. No, I'm not going to go into politics. That's not what this channel is about. But, I just had to mention it because I had to. Anyway, so back to Marxism. It might not deal specifically with the lowest class overthrowing the most upper class, but like I said before, that's not Marxism. It is simply one class overthrowing those without power, taking it from those with it. So the next thing I'm going to get into after this Marxist discussion is structuralism and poststructuralism. And I'm really going to lump them together. And I'm going to give, sort of a very brief understanding of it. I mean, I like it a lot. I love linguistics. I annoy people with how much I love the way words function and whatnot. And it's just, this is where I think our minds can just really expand. So I'm going to explore the language, or specifically the diction and syntax involved in the dialogues between the characters, and specifically with Macbeth's monologue. Okay, if we don't remember it, it's tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, right? Creeps in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesteryears have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts his hour or his self upon the stage and is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And I know I messed that monologue up, but I'm not going to go and re-record this narration or this voiceover just to fix it. It's a human error, and that's what Macbeth's about. It's about the intrinsic human errors, how the littlest things creep into our minds, and they create a blackness, they create a darkness that we can't escape, no matter how hard we try. And it's very, very brief sometimes, but ultimately, though, it is just a fact of being human. So, going back to the monologue, looking at the latter, as in looking at the monologue or thinking about it, verses such as to the last syllable of recorded time reference the god Cronus, the god of time in Greek mythology, death and time as well, death and time. And it automatically, and it subtextually, points to the devouring of his children. Right, Cronus devoured his children, and that goes back to that other king who was overthrown. Macbeth overthrew the king. So that referencing Cronus himself as being the overthrown, and his son Zeus, who escapes and establishes a new kingdom. However, Macbeth does not escape. Macbeth has to answer for his misdeeds. This makes this post-structuralist. The oppressed does not necessarily become better for his usurpation. In fact, what does the oppressed usually become? Just another oppressor. So let's give some examples. China, you were oppressed, okay? You were colonially oppressed, okay, by the British specifically, okay? But a lot of people had a hand, okay, in oppressing you, okay, including your neighbor Japan. But what do? You go and you invade Tibet, and you murder, you massacre tons of innocent monks. You rape women, you kill children, you force children to watch their parents being murdered. What the hell, okay, is going on here? Now let's make another point with Myanmar, right? And the junta, right? Or junta, whatever you want to call it, oppressing their own people. Or how Muslims oppress Hindus and Christians, or Christians oppress Muslims and Hindus, or Hindus oppress Muslims and Christians, and all that stuff in between. Or the Sinhalese in Sri Lanka oppressing Tamils, okay? And what's even weirder and ironic about all that is the Sinhalese are Buddhist, okay? Now, mind you, they're Theravada Buddhist, Hinayana, okay? And there's a certain sort of austerity to that form of Buddhism. But that doesn't matter, though. It's just people oppressing other people. And there's many, many other names you can use for all these people. It could be, are they Buddhist or they Christian? It's just that word doesn't mean anything, and that's post-structuralism, okay? You have to separate the signifier from what's signified, okay? So the noun or the verb is the signifier, and then you take the meaning, the inherent meaning, out of it, and it's given something else. So hopefully that wasn't too weird to understand. So, like I said before, the original oppressed almost always becomes a new oppressor. And postcolonialism and, or whatnot, this postcolonialism basically is the cycle, okay, reborn again and again and again. It reincarnates itself. And all this can be used to analyze the effects and the origins of this kind of behavior. So naturally, this also incorporates another theory, which is called psychoanalytic theory, which I'd say, yeah, it has some Freudian elements to it. It also has a lot of Jungian elements to it. I tend to prefer Jung over Freud, but I do also like Freud too. I mean, he's kind of a fun one to work with. But Jung has a lot more, fruit to pick, so to speak. So going back to Macbeth's soliloquy, the word time is a signifier, but what it signifies is something much grander. And this can be related immediately to the play, such as Macbeth's time running out before the dead king's son comes to subdue him. Or it can play out mythologically with the allegory of Cronus and Zeus. It does not even have to go in that direction at all, So who's ever writing the essay, who's ever coming up with their own theory, this is your oyster, okay? This is the most beautiful part of analyzing literature, and once again, why I love Shakespeare so much. And I'm not even going to get into an argument on whether or not he actually wrote the play, okay? I don't care. Because, not to get too postmodernist on you, the author is dead. And he's literally dead. He died in the 17th century, so moving on. One of the other theories that postcolonialism can utilize is feminist theory, or gender theory, and depending on how the writer employs it, of course. So referring back to Macbeth, and the relationship between the titular character and his wife is ripe for analysis. She is overbearing and manipulative, and I'm sorry, women, you may hate me, but I'm saying she is. Read the play. She is overbearing, and she's manipulative, and much more Machiavellian than her husband. In fact, you could even argue that her husband's just a tool for her to gain power. So whoever is analyzing this work can then tackle it from at least two angles, if not from both simultaneously. One could analyze the reasons or the importance for making a woman so evil and remorseless and not the man, because if you really think about it, she doesn't really ever show signs of remorse. Does she really? I mean, there might be a couple, verses in there somewhere that I have to go and look for them specifically, but we get the remorse with Macbeth. So this could bear some major significance contemporarily, right? Secondly, the roles of the male and female as Jungian archetypes in the play's struggle can reinforce the themes in the play. So Macbeth is animus, and his wife is anima. Animus, the outgoing extrovert. Anima, the introvert, or the shadow. His wife is the shadow, and she creeps upon him, engulfing him eventually, entirely and completely. One oppresses another until the audience doesn't know who started it. The chicken and the egg scenario. Did Macbeth oppress his wife, or did the Lady Macbeth oppress her husband? And so there we have questions can then arise to what is Macbeth's true nature? Is he truly evil, or is he just manipulated? Or is Lady Macbeth truly evil, or is she just manipulated? And what about the weird sisters, the three witches? They're women, past, present, and future. We are always going to be manipulated to the last syllable of recorded time by our past, what we've done, what our parents have done, by our present, the choices that we make today, and how it affects our future, and how then in the future we have to look back upon the past and deal with our consequences. So the next question would then be, how could Macbeth have let himself become so manipulated? Or why is Lady Macbeth so manipulating? Like I said, it's ripe for analysis. And of course, the answer to the latter can be simple, or is it really simple? I mean, Lady Macbeth is manipulating because she is a medieval woman with no inherent power. She must wield said power through her husband, and therefore her machinations are not intrinsically evil, but they're just a simple politics power play. That's it. Occam's razor, right? The simplest answer is usually the correct one. So this is essentially what postcolonialism refers to. It ultimately deals with oppression, but because that theme is so generic, given that most characters in any given work show signs of being oppressed, this theory is therefore highly applicable. Oppression, oppression, oppression. That is the most common theme, right, in everything. And contrarily, though, like I said at the very beginning of this video, this is where the theory lends itself to a bit of hypocrisy. And I'm sure you figured it out already yourselves. And this is also where all theories ultimately have their flaws. I mean, nothing is, it's a theory, right? It's theoretical. There's no law about it at all. Postcolonialism deals with the oppressed, but it appropriates from almost every other theory imaginable, including modernist theories such as psychoanalytic and other theories which stem from other realms of thought, such as reader response theory and new criticism. It attempts to read something into its own isolation, without previous knowledge of who the writer was, or the history behind the piece, or at the very least, what the writer intended. And that is what brings the imperial element, or imperialist element, out in postcolonialist theory. And if postcolonialism, the theory, is supposed to be used, okay, and it shows signs of being imperialistic, I think we've hit the hypocrisy, right? We've reached the where it is the most hypocritical. So when I mentioned reader response a few seconds ago, that's putting the writer's own history into the analysis of the piece, and therefore the writer would be divulging their own alienation. They would, they would be self-alienated, and that's just, now we're getting into this sort of, we were caught in a web, and I'd rather not be caught in that. You know what I'm saying? So this is not necessarily horrible, but it may take away some of the credence from postcolonialist theory, mainly because the theory has too much support from other theories that its very definition is lost somewhere in one of them, and that's just kind of sad. So, like I said, this is where your mind just keeps going and going and going, and eventually, you forgot where you started from. Don't go so far that I cannot see you, I believe was the line in The Namesake. And finally, the last bit of hypocrisy may derive from the word colonialism, which references imperialism. So if post-colonialist theory is so egalitarian, by amalgamating most theories under one name, then it is inherently being imperialist, which, it's funny because imperialism seeks to aggrandize itself on the actions of others. That is itself oppression. So all theories have their flaws, and therefore not a single one can fit any mold that the writer is attempting to seek. If there is an ultimate goal in analyzing literature, it would be the search for meaning in an otherwise meaningless and absurd world. Writing is the attempt to make sense of something without the overbearing left-brain language of the introverted philosopher, because writing is creating even when there is analysis. So new ideas and connections arise from where there weren't any before, or not those exact ones at the very least. New ideas, new connections. Isn't that what we're all searching for, right? And without having to define every single theory, the writer can simply take a little here and a little there and form their own each time. Like in Big Trouble in Little China, when they're trying to explain, the plot, and there's that expository part, and explaining to Kurt Russell's character, Jack Burton, that, that's Chinese culture. It took it's Buddhism, it has Taoism, it has Confucianism, it has Chinese sorcery, black magic, all that stuff. We just, it's like a buffet, right? And so that the possibilities of analyzing any given piece over centuries, it's just limitless. So let us prove Macbeth wrong, okay? Let us prove Macbeth wrong. We are not shadows walking on a stage. And our lives, in fact, signify something. Okay. So in the words of Garrison Keillor, be well, do good work, and keep in touch. See you next time.